All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to be looking at basically, excuse me, the slave trade. Okay, because you have to remember the Louisiana Purchase basically woke up a sleeping bear. So yeah, there's some problems that are going to creep up now because of that. We're going to analyze how the cotton gin made things worse for slavery. We're examining the different ways slaves try to strike back against their owners. Again, like I said to the class, um, so many people, so many students I've heard over the years have said things like, "Oh, if I was there, I would have done this, I would have done that. I would have just, sat back and let them do that to me like those people did back then." No, they actually did stuff, and we're going to talk about that today. And we're creating an argument on whether the Missouri Compromise was a good thing or bad thing. And that's actually your warm up. Okay. So so here is, if you notice, on the right side of the country where it's, where New York, Pennsylvania, and all those places are, you'll notice it's nice and set, it's fixed, right? Where it says north and south. You notice how it's all pieced together really well. And look at that red line. See how straight it is, right? Now, if you look at where all the question marks are, that's the area that we gained during the Louisiana Purchase. So the question asking you, based off your analysis and looking at this picture and breaking it down, what do you think about this Missouri Compromise? Or sorry, the Compromise of 1850. So look at it. Look at what I mean. Like I said in class, simplify it. Look at that far side with all the question marks. How would you best describe that area? Okay. So the where it has those question marks and stuff like that with the little puzzle pieces, jigsaw pieces, whatever you want to call it. How would you describe that area? Okay. Again, the area where it says north and south, if you notice how, set it is and things like that, if you see the line, it's nice and straight. But when you get to the question mark area, um, what happens to that line? Look at all the other pieces. Again, describe that. How would you best describe that little area? Okay. So think about it, write your response because we're moving on in three, two, one. So, like I said in the objectives area, the Louisiana Purchase caused a rift in the slavery issue because for years, well, not really years, but good set of time, like 10 years or so, maybe 15. Um, the issue of the slavery was kind of like the hibernating bear. It was just there. Nobody paid attention to it. They kind of just let it be for the moment. But when the Louisiana Purchase happened, and now we got all this new land, the issue came up. Is that land going to be free land, where African Americans and slaves are free? Or is that going to be slave states, where slavery is allowed and is actually, encouraged in a sense? Okay. But now here's the thing. In 1820, Maine, the state of Maine, wants to be part of the United States. And here's the thing. Some people tend to think that Maine was one of the original 13 colonies. It wasn't. It wasn't even one of the original 13 states. They didn't join us until 1820. But the thing is, once they decided, yes, we want to be part of the United States, they said, however, we want to be free. We don't want to be a slave state. We hate slavery. We think it's stupid. Now the southern states are getting upset, not because they were called stupid, but because now the free states have more political power. They have more states. They have more population. They have more votes now. And so now they're worried that those free states are going to start making laws saying slavery is bad. Slavery should be, taxed like heavy, heavy tax. It should be stopped all completely. So they're really, 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 really upset. And to kind of like calm down the people, Congress basically said, well, you know what? Missouri wants to be part of the United States, and we'll tell you what, we'll let them decide. Well, the thing is, everybody and their mama knew that Missouri was going to be a slave state. And to kind of make sure of it, I don't know if you guys know this, but most of those families back then had a lot of kids. You know, they tend to sometimes be in the double digits. And what they would do is like basically tell like the second, third, fourth, fifth son, someone who's more than likely not going to get too much land from the father, things like that, an inheritance type of thing. Um, hey, go to Missouri, you know, claim some land, start your own, but be sure you vote slave. You know, eventually, the North would get a hold of this as well. That hey, they were basically pumping people into those territories and making them vote a certain way, free or slave. So eventually, the North would do the same thing. Now, the thing is, Missouri gets admitted as a slave state again, like everyone knew. But this guy, Jesse B. Thomas, he decided, you know what, maybe we should try to tackle this slavery issue. So he comes up with a plan, you know, and basically he says at the 3630 parallel line, every land above that line should be free, and everything below that line should be slave forever. Now, at first, the southern states kind of like that. They're like, yeah, that sounds great, slavery forever. But then they kind of noticed, um, there's more land to the north and the south. The only way we would be free is if we take land away from Mexico. Well, I mean, we could do that, but I mean, that's going to cause a rift and things like that. So yeah, there was some issue. And then they said, oh well, we can adjust the line, and then that would make the northern people kind of upset because they're like, well, what if we set up a state, right? And all of a sudden you decide, oh, I'm going to put the line like right here. Well, now you got half the state slave, the other half free. How is that going to work? And again, it just caused rifts and anger and things like that. Um, so what they basically said, oh, let's keep it even still. Okay, fine. If that plan don't work, let's do it when one state comes in, they're free, and the next one's a slave. That way it stays even. Guys, that's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. It's gonna work for a second, but that's about it. Okay. Now the northern cities, they started to expand both in land and population. Now here's the thing though. It's great for a city to expand, but the thing is now you have to give those people their essential needs. You know, shelter, food, well, clothing they can buy themselves. But the thing is, they need food and water. Well, water was pretty easy, because hey, there's a lot of streams and things like that, rivers. So fresh water, uh, they could manage. But food, that's where the problem was. Because the thing is, you have to remember, this is northern land. They have a lot of factories. Did they have farms? Sure. You know, did they have dairies? Yeah, but not enough to feed everyone in the north. They basically had to rely also on the south. Now, this is where the conundrum comes in. They don't like slavery, but they need slavery in order to get food, especially food cheap. Okay. And that's also an issue what people say today. Oh, we should get rid of illegals and things like that, and we deport them. Well, then who's going to pick the food? You know, and let's say they get average American people. Well, the thing is, the pay, they don't pay farm workers, minimum wage. They pay them less. And the thing is, if you American people, let's say they started working in the fields, the price of the food is going to go up, really up. So that's the thing. It's like the catch 22. You know, they want something, but it's going to hurt them. So, what are they going to do? You know, now in the South they had very few large cities. It was rare. A lot of times, large cities would be at like port cities, like the cities right near the ocean and things like that, near large body of water. Um, but they wouldn't really have a lot of big cities because again, they wanted as much land as possible to grow their crops. Uh, and this is where they focused on crops they knew would sell like crazy. So like tobacco really sold, especially in like England and Europe and things like that. Rice, yeah, they could sell rice. Sugarcane, sugarcane. Um, if you've never seen that plant, it's pretty tall, 6 to 10 feet tall, on average. Um, but the golden crop, the one that they knew they could sell and make a ton of money, was cotton. Okay, now, um, Eli Whitney, right, inventor. We talked about him in our last lesson. He saw that there was a lot of slaves, some picking cotton, some of that, but then there was a lot more that were tearing through the cotton, taking out the seeds by hand, taking out the twigs, things like that. Um, and he was like, huh. So they're cleaning it. They're taking all that stuff out. And then it dawned on me, what if I make a machine that does that? It cleans the cotton. And when it does that, basically then they won't need as many slaves to do, clean through them. And then they'll have a bunch of slaves just sitting around doing nothing. So then they'll be like, okay, we don't need as many slaves. So that will reduce the slave trade. And then eventually there won't be any need for slavery. So to him, it sounds logical. Now, here's the thing, a lot of inventors in history do things for the good of man, and it ends up, you know, hurting us even more. And that's exactly what the cotton gin did. So his thought of, oh, they're going to not need slaves as much anymore. Actually, what happened was they took those slaves who were cleaning the cotton, put them into the field, and made them pick the cotton. Now they got twice as many people picking the cotton, so they get the cotton picked faster. They're able to use this machine that's going to clean it, right? And then they're able to sell it sooner and sell it for a higher price. So, yeah. And then when those slave owners got the more money, instead of being like, oh, we're just going to sit on our butts with all this nice money, no, they expanded. They bought more land. They bought more slaves. They bought more cotton gins. So, yeah. Um, and like I said, he really did, even when he really did have good intention in his heart, but no, it just ended up hurting people and made the slave trade worse. 2/3 of all exports was cotton. And there's a saying in the South, and it's basically still true to this day, cotton is king. So slaves were brought in at a record pace, basically from when the first slave came in until 1820. They collected about 1.5 million slaves, right? So it's been quite a bit of years. Um, and the thing is, in 30 years, they basically doubled it and a little extra. So, yeah, what happens was typically when slaves were picked up from Africa, usually they would come to like South America, then to the Caribbean islands, and then to us. And like a student asked me in class, well, where would they go in the Caribbeans? Um, you know, uh, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, things like that. Because those places, a lot of them had sugarcane, plantations. So a lot of them worked in the sugar canes. And then they would come to the United States. Well, now that these guys are making money, they're telling these guys, hey, don't go over there first. Come to us. We need slaves. We'll pay you top dollar. So of course these guys came first and sold them to America. Just to give you a perception, in the South during this time, during the 1850s and stuff, 37% of the total population in the South was slave. Basically, in for every three people, one person was a slave. All right. So one of the things I've heard some people say on TikTok would be like, "Oh, my ancestors, we didn't have any slaves. We were, our family had poor, grew up poor, and they had very little farmland, you know." And the thing is, just because they were poor doesn't mean that they didn't have slaves. Because the thing is, you have to remember, not every slave cost the same amount. Some were worth more because they were bigger, stronger, things like that. And then some were, I mean, really at a cheaper price because, again, some of them were older, some of them were hurt, disabled in some way. Some, were fit, but they, try to escape so many times that they, were basically like at your own discretion. This person has a history of running away and things like that. So the price is going to be dropped on them. So just because there were, you know, farmers with a little tiny farm doesn't mean that they didn't have slaves. Now, did all of them have slaves? No, no. But to say that, oh, you had a small farm, our ancestors had a small farm, so they couldn't afford slaves. They could have. They could have. So that claim is completely false. Now, there were a bunch of laws where it said that slaves could not do certain things and stuff like that. This is just a little handful. Okay. Um, One, all enslaved people could not own property. And when I mean property, I mean anything. They couldn't own anything. Not even the shirt on their back technically belonged to them. No. Okay. That belonged to their owner, their master. Okay. So, yeah, they did not own anything, could not own anything. Um, they couldn't leave their master's premise, their area around the master, without asking for permission. So, even if the master came to where they were, and they had to go somewhere, go to restroom or get some tools from the shed. They had to ask their master for permission, even though they came to where they were. Doesn't matter. Now that they're around you, you have to ask for permission. This next one was interesting. They couldn't testify against a white person in court. So even though a slave may have seen um, one white person kill another white person, they couldn't testify. Even if that person who's was killed, even if that person's family was like, we want him to, he saw it all. We want his statement on the record and things like that. No, the court would basically tell that family, yeah, his word, their word does not mean anything. They are a slave. You know. But of all things, one of the biggest ones I've seen time and time again constantly come up is it was forbidden for slaves to know how to read and write. Okay. Now, slaves tried different ways to try to read. Some um, took pages from magazines and books and things like that and tried to read. Some indoor slaves would try to learn when the kids were being tutored and stuff like that at home. Um, they would try to listen and hear and things like that and try to learn that way. Okay. Now, of all the escaped slaves, one of the most famous of them all is that man right there, Frederick Douglass. Okay. He was a slave. He was born a slave. He got his freedom. He ran away, and he uh, later became the leader of the anti-slavery movement. And the thing is, he wrote a book called My Bondage and My Freedom. And the thing is, in Britain, that book was a major seller. People were flabbergasted at the treatment that African Americans had. They couldn't believe it. They were just astonished because in his book, he talks about what life was like as a slave. The day that they usually had from sunup to sundown and the treatment of them and things like that, how they were separated, families were separated, mother from children, and things like that. Um, and the people in the North in America who were against slavery were just like, we knew it. We knew this stuff was happening. Like, here it is in this memoir book explaining it all. And the Southern people were basically like, that's all lies. You can't believe that. I mean, look who wrote it. You can't trust them. And besides, not all of us are like that. We don't all treat our slaves that way. So yeah. So any type of excuse they could make, they made it. Okay. So I took a minute or two to go through my collection. I actually found the book right here. All right. So this is his book that he wrote talking about his time as from birth until basically when he uh, was the advisor for Abraham Lincoln and helping start um, the All Black Regiment in the Civil War, which we'll be talking about in several weeks. Okay. So, yeah, here's the book right here. Yeah. Now, the thing is, I've heard students in the past say like things like, well, I would have done this, I would have done that, I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't just taken those beatings and stuff like that, like those people did back then. Thing is, guys, they didn't. Okay, they did strike back, but they did it their own way. One of the most effective tactics um, that slaves did to hurt their the slave owners, one of them was slowdowns. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's basically they're picking the fruit, whatever it may be. Let's say like strawberries. Let's just throw that example. Instead of grabbing a bunch of them, hurrying up, things like that, they would take their time, go slow, pick one at a time, right? And you have to remember, these guys had acres and acres of land. So if they didn't finish, chances are that fruit at the end was going to be rotten. Higher chance that animals were going to come and eat it, whether it's foxes, coyotes, birds, whatever. Um, so, yeah. And the thing is, like a student said in class, well, wouldn't they get beaten? Yes, they would. But you have to remember, they've been taking a beating all their lives. What's one more? What's going to hurt more? The beating they get or the owner losing a ton of money? It's going to be the money. Okay. Another thing they would do was actually set fire to the masters' houses and the barns. The barns were interesting because that's where they stored a lot of the stuff, the cotton, the fruits and vegetables and things like that. So at nighttime, which was typically done, the barn would catch on fire, and then they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, it's on fire!" And then they would tell the master, "Hey, we don't know what happened, but I bet you anything it's probably your rival, maybe the neighbors, you guys are competing, so maybe they did that. Yeah, yeah. Don't worry, we'll get them back. But in reality, it was them. They set it on fire. So again, the owner would lose a ton of money. Um, Now a lot of you guys know about the slaves running away. Yes, that's true. But did you know some of them actually try to kill their owner before they left? Yeah, some of them would. Majority of the time, it was at nighttime. You know, some of them would try to like stab, their owner. Some of them would try to choke them out. You know, suffocate them with a pillow. Try different ways, different tactics to try to kill their masters before they left. Okay. Um, Now about 200,000 slaves got away and lived in the North. And this is a time where the first ones, really the first large batch, they really started to, okay, we have to make a life for ourselves. But also some of them were like, you know what, we need to do what we can to help those that are coming in. So some of them organized churches, some of them had businesses, and they would basically take in these newly freed slaves, and then they would give them what they needed, give them a job, help them get on their way to either keep pursuing north, going towards Canada and stuff like that, or start a new life for themselves in the northern states. All right, so here is my question to you. Why would it be so important for slave owners to make sure their slaves couldn't read or write. What's so important about reading and writing that they said, no, 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 they should not be allowed to read and write? And again, like I said, especially in class, that was like one of the top laws in all the slave states. They are forbidden to read and write. Why was that so important? Okay, so think about it. Write down what you believe, what you think, what your ideas you thought of. Okay, um, but once you finish this question, that's it. You are done with this lesson. So hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. With that being said, guys, you take care, you be safe, and I'll see you guys later.